The galaxy was old. Stars had burned, collapsed, and been reborn countless times, and in the spaces between, civilizations had risen and fallen, each leaving behind whispers of power and dust of memory. At its center of order stood the Galactic Council, a towering institution of ancient species that claimed stewardship over trillions of lives. It was a council born not of justice, but of dominance, a circle of predators who declared themselves arbiters of peace through subjugation. Worlds that bent the knee thrived under their chains. Worlds that resisted were erased from every record, as if they had never existed. Such was the law of the stars, a law enforced with fleets that could blot out constellations and weapons that could unmake planets. Against such power, no single race had endured without submission, until humanity. Earth had only recently reached the threshold where it could be noticed. Ships, crewed by galactic standards but persistent. Colonies seated on its moon, on Mars, on drifting rocks in the belt. Humanity was still young by the measure of the Council, a child grasping at the stars with hands not yet calloused by eons. And yet, the Council had taken notice, not with admiration, but with contempt. For the humans had begun to expand too quickly, their numbers spilling outward like wildfire, their machines cutting into asteroids, their settlements clinging to harsh worlds where older species would never set foot. Growth without permission was rebellion in the eyes of the Council, and rebellion was intolerable. The tribute demand was inevitable. When the envoy arrived, it did not come as a visitor. It came as a shadow that blanketed the skies. A single ship, vast beyond comparison, descending into orbit, its hull shimmered with alloys unknown to Earth, a fortress that had crossed light years effortlessly. It spoke not in words, but in broadcast force upon every device, every network, every screen. A voice ancient and cold. It announced humanity's place as vassals of the Council, demanded tribute in the form of resources, labor, and unwavering obedience. It left no ambiguity. Refusal would mean eradication, as had been the fate of countless before. The demand was not a negotiation. It was a sentence. The world listened in silence. In cities, people gathered around screens, faces pale. In rural lands, farmers heard it through radios, their hands frozen mid-work. In offices, leaders and ministers received translations and transcripts, their lips dry, their eyes unable to meet one another. The words had been delivered with such indifference, as though humanity's fate had already been sealed, a minor footnote in the endless annals of galactic dominance. Some trembled in fear, others clenched fists in anger, but all felt the same chill, the realization that the universe had noticed them, and it had noticed them not as equals, but as prey. In the Council's chambers far from Earth, discussions were laced with arrogance. To them, humanity was no different than a nuisance species, clever perhaps, but insignificant. The demand for tribute was standard procedure, a ritual repeated over millennia. They expected compliance, as all had complied before. A few counselors whispered concerns. They noted the pace of human expansion, the peculiar stubbornness of their history, the records of endless wars among themselves. But these voices were drowned beneath laughter and scorn. To fear humans was absurd. They were fragile creatures bound to a fragile world. Their weapons were obsolete, their ships barely worthy of recognition. Their lives were short, their instincts primitive. Against the weight of the Council, they were nothing. Yet Earth did not break. In the hours and days that followed, discussions raged in secret. Governments met in intense conferences. Military leaders exchanged desperate calculations. Economists mapped tribute demands against planetary survival and found only collapse. To submit meant slow death by strangulation. To resist meant annihilation. It was a choice crafted by tyrants to leave no hope. But humanity had walked such paths before. In every century of their history, empires had risen demanding obedience, and each time there had been those who bent, those who broke, and those who fought. What the Council could not understand was that humans carried within them the memory of struggle written in blood across every age. Narration drifts through time. The shields of Thermopylae, the long night of sieges, the fields soaked at Waterloo, the skies burning over London, the frozen trenches of Somme, the blackened ruins of Stalingrad. Every era had tested them, and every era had taught the same truth. Humanity did not endure by submission, but by defiance. They were predators who turned desperation into resolve, inventors who turned scarcity into ingenuity, survivors who turned despair into fire. To demand obedience from such a species was to demand they abandon the very core of their existence. The ultimatum, though brief, spread across Earth like wildfire. In homes, families spoke of the end. In bars, voices rose in anger. On the streets, people gathered, their eyes lifted skyward. A strange unity began to take root, not commanded, but felt. For the first time in living memory, humanity faced not one another, but something greater, something that saw them all as equal in their insignificance. That equality bred unity. Differences of nation, of creed, of ideology paled against the shadow of annihilation. Humanity was many, but in that moment, they began to move as one. The Council's arrogance deepened. Reports from their envoy described hesitation, fear, disarray. They misread the silence, mistook it for weakness. They believed Earth was calculating how best to submit. Their archives were filled with examples of races who had delayed, who had wavered, who had finally knelt. The humans would be no different, they thought. Soon tribute would flow, and another chain would be fastened. So certain were they of this outcome that preparations for war were not even advanced. The fleets remained idle, the vast armies unhurried. To crush humanity was an afterthought, but within Earth, the silence was not weakness. It was calculation. It was a gathering of breath before the shout. Leaders who once stood opposed found themselves speaking in the same voice. Military commanders who once planned against each other began planning together. Scientists who once worked in isolation began to share across borders. In every nation, in every city, in every place where humans gathered, a decision was forming. It was not born of optimism, for the odds were impossible. It was not born of arrogance, for they knew their weakness. It was born of defiance, of something ancient and unyielding within their blood. If they were to be erased, they would not vanish silently. They would burn so brightly that the galaxy would remember them. The day came when Earth answered. The Council awaited the ritual of surrender, the signing of treaties, the declarations of servitude. Instead, they received a transmission unlike any other. No ceremony, no hesitation, no wasted words. A single broadcast, carried on every frequency, translated into every tongue. The voice was steady, without fear, without apology. It said only one word, and that word carried the weight of all humanity's history, all their rage, all their unity, all their defiance. That word was war. The word echoed to the void, carried across channels designed for surrender, but filled instead with defiance. War. A single syllable that shattered expectation, a challenge hurled into the face of powers that had stood unopposed for ages. For a moment the council chambers fell into silence, disbelief quenching arrogance. Then came the uproar. Some laughed, sharp and derisive, the laughter of predators mocking prey that bared its teeth. Others fumed with insult, their voices dripping with threats of annihilation. But beneath the noise there were those who listened carefully, their expressions dark. They understood what the word truly meant. It was not bravado. It was not ignorance. It was resolve naked and unyielding. For a species so young to declare war upon the council was madness. Yet madness had a history of reshaping empires. The archives were filled with records of insurgents who refused submission, but none had done so openly. None had dared to speak the word to the council itself. This made humanity unique. The humans had announced not resistance but war, and in doing so they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, no retreat, only survival or extinction. On Earth, the declaration was not the end but the beginning. Across every continent, every nation, every settlement, the weight of the decision fell like a storm. Fear surged, but alongside it came determination. The Council's demand had stripped away illusions. No longer could disputes between nations matter. No longer could ideological divides stand. What good were boundaries when the stars themselves sought to burn them down? Leaders who had once distrusted each other now sat at the same tables. Enemies who had spent decades plotting against one another shook hands and drafted plans side by side. The choice to resist was not made by one government, one council, or one alliance. It was made by humanity itself, a silent consensus that echoed across billions of minds. We will not kneel. Factories roared to life. Assembly lines that once built cars and machines for commerce shifted to production of weapons, ships, and armor. The air filled with the clamor of industry, a music of defiance. Scientists who had competed for grants now worked in unison, sharing knowledge without hesitation. Engineers studied alien signals, breaking down fragments of intercepted transmissions, salvaging pieces of technology left behind by the envoy, twisting them into crude but functional tools of war. Humanity did not need equal counsel and power. They needed only to adapt, to exploit, to find the cracks in an empire grown complacent. In orbit, stations once meant for research were transformed into fortresses. Shipyards expanded rapidly, crews working in shifts without pause. Old vessels, relics of Earth's tentative steps into space, were stripped down and refitted, armed with weapons beyond their original design. Pilots trained in simulators that barely kept pace with the demands placed upon them. Soldiers drilled in environments designed to mimic alien worlds. Everywhere the air thickened with a strange unity. For the first time in history, humanity was not divided into factions of self-interest. For the first time, they fought for one banner, one cause. The Council, meanwhile, oscillated between arrogance and unease. Reports streamed in from observers. Humanity was mobilizing faster than anticipated. Resources were redirected with ruthless efficiency. Their industries operated with scale and speed that defied predictions. Other species, when faced with the Council's demands, had crumbled into chaos, tearing themselves apart under the weight of fear. Humanity, instead, grew stronger. They had accepted the certainty of destruction, and in doing so, freed themselves from hesitation. This frightened the cautious voices within the Council, though they dared not admit it openly. The first skirmish came sooner than expected. A patrol fleet dispatched to monitor Earth's compliance was intercepted near the edge of the solar system. By Council standards, it was a minor engagement, insignificant. By human standards, it was a turning point. Crude missiles and improvised railguns clashed against shields that had once been thought impenetrable. Losses were heavy, ships burned, and lives were lost in silence among the stars. Yet against all odds, humanity claimed a victory. One enemy vessel was destroyed, another crippled. It was enough. For the Council, it was an insult. For humanity, it was proof. The myth of invincibility had been shattered. The news spread not only across Earth, but across the stars. Broadcasts carried whispers of the impossible. A young species had stood against the Council and bloodied it. Other worlds, long crushed beneath tribute and fear, listened with something dangerous stirring in their hearts. Hope. If humans could resist, perhaps chains were not eternal. The Council noticed this too, and for the first time, unease began to spread through their ranks. Defiance was a contagion, and it had begun to infect the galaxy. Humanity, aware of their symbolic role, leaned into it. Their leaders spoke not of survival alone, but of freedom. They declared that the Council's rule was not destiny, that no species was born to serve. Their words were carried across channels the Council could not silence, bouncing between networks like sparks on dry grass. The oppressed began to listen. Some whispered prayers for human victory. Others began small acts of sabotage against their overseers. The Council tightened its grip, but the tighter it clenched, the more rebellion seeped through its fingers. Meanwhile, humanity innovated. They studied every piece of captured technology, tearing it apart, understanding it with terrifying speed. Where others saw incomprehensible design, humans saw opportunity. Shields became weaknesses once probed from unexpected angles. Engines became targets for new forms of disruption. Council doctrine, rigid and centuries old, became a map for ambushes and traps. Humanity did not fight as the Council fought. They fought like predators, unpredictable, adapting with each encounter. In war games designed by alien minds, such tactics would have been dismissed as reckless, suicidal. Yet humans thrived in the reckless, turned suicide into sacrifice, and sacrifice into victory. The Council retaliated with overwhelming force. Larger fleets entered human space, weapons blazing. Planet-side defenses crumbled, cities burned, lives were lost by the millions. Yet each victory for the Council was bought with blood they had not expected to spill. Human ships, small and fragile, darted into the gaps of their armadas, striking like wolves among lumbering beasts. Entire battalions were sacrificed to delay advances, giving time for others to regroup. What the Council could not comprehend was the human relationship with death. To them, loss was shame, a wound to pride. To humans, loss was expected, woven into the fabric of existence. They mourned, yes, but they did not break. They adapted and they continued. The fleets came like a storm. The Council had decided, and when they decided, the galaxy itself seemed to shift beneath the weight of their will. Tens of thousands of ships, each a fortress in its own right, poured from the dark between stars. Their arrival was heralded not by warning, but by silence, the kind of silence that follows inevitability. To the Council, this was not a war, it was an execution. Earth would be erased. Humanity would be scattered dust. The message was clear. No one defies the Council and survives. From orbit above Earth, the Armada blotted out the constellations. From the surface, the sky itself seemed to fracture under their presence. The ground shook not from their weapons, but from the weight of dread. Entire continents looked upward, knowing what waited beyond their atmosphere. Fear was natural. Yet beneath the fear, something else moved through humanity. A resolve, a cold and steady determination. They had always known it would come to this. The word they had spoken, war, was not a boast. It was a vow, and vows demanded fulfillment. The first strikes came swift and merciless. Orbital stations were vaporized. Satellites shattered. Moon bases collapsed into rubble. Yet every blow struck was answered. Earth's defenders did not wait passively to die. They launched swarms of ships, small, agile, armed with weapons crude by Council standards, but devastating when wielded with human cunning. They hurled missiles by the thousands, not to pierce shields directly, but to overwhelm them, to choke systems designed for order with chaos. They turned asteroids into weapons, slingshotting them into formation lines. They tore apart their own stations, converting debris into fields of shrapnel that turned void into death traps. Humanity did not fight by the rules of the Council. Humanity wrote its own. Losses were catastrophic. Entire fleets were swallowed in fire. Cities on Earth burned as bombardments rained down. The oceans boiled where beams of energy cut deep. Millions died in the opening hours. But every death bought time, and time was the one resource humanity wielded with mastery. With every moment bought, reinforcements launched, weapons recalibrated, traps sprung. With every moment bought, the cost for the Council mounted. What they had expected to crush in days stretched into weeks. What should have been simple became blood-soaked. For the first time in centuries, the Council was not marching forward. They were bleeding. The turning point came not from power, but from strategy. Humanity understood they could not outmatch the Council's strength, but they could outthink them. Council fleets moved with precision, with doctrines forged in ages of victory. But those doctrines were rigid, predictable. Humanity studied them like predators stalking prey, and when the moment came, they struck. Feints drew fleets into ambushes within asteroid belts. Decoys lured flagships into minefields seeded with nuclear fire. Jumps through unstable wormholes cut off supply lines, leaving entire armadas stranded. Again and again, the Council advanced into traps, and again, they paid in ships and blood. Each victory for humanity was small in the scale of the war, but massive in the scale of the galaxy, for word spread beyond battlefields. Slaves on distant worlds whispered to the humans who fought the Council and lived. Rebellions began to stir, first in hidden corners, then openly. Riots broke out in tribute worlds. Supply shipments vanished. Council garrisons were attacked by their own subjects. Defiance, once unthinkable, was spreading like fire. The Council could crush humanity's ships, but they could not crush the idea of humanity, and that idea was proving deadlier than any weapon. On Earth, the war ground on. Sacrifice became the measure of every victory. Soldiers hurled themselves into hopeless fights to buy precious hours. Pilots lit the void with their last missiles before ramming their dying ships into enemy hulls. Civilians worked without rest, forging weapons, building fortifications, coding viruses to infiltrate alien systems. Children learned to run drills in shelters, their lullabies drowned out by the hum of defense sirens. Humanity was burning itself alive to fight, and yet their fire only grew brighter. The Council escalated further. They unleashed weapons unseen in generations, planet-cracking bombs. Fleets designed for extermination, horrors built for no purpose but to erase civilizations. Earth should have broken. Humanity should have collapsed. But they endured. They adapted. Every horror unveiled was studied, countered, turned back upon its creators. The very tools meant to erase humanity became weapons in their hands. To the Council, this was blasphemy. To humanity, it was survival. At last, the final gambit came. Humanity knew they could not simply defend. Defense was death postponed. To live, they had to strike at the heart. And so they gathered what remained, every ship, every weapon, every soldier willing to make the final sacrifice. They charted a course not to victory, but to vengeance. They would not let the Council erase them without showing the galaxy that tyrants could bleed to the core. The assault began with chaos, as all human assaults did. Small ships darted through fire, cutting open gaps for larger vessels. Sabotage Council codes were unleashed, sowing confusion in fleets accustomed to perfect discipline. Nuclear fire bloomed across the void, detonations blinding sensors, tearing holes in formations. Humanity pressed forward, not in neat lines but in swarms, like a tide that refused to be turned back. They broke through. Against all odds, against every calculation, they broke through. And when they reached the Council's strongholds, they unleashed everything. Viruses burned through systems. Bombs detonated in chain reactions. Flagships that had never known fear erupted in silence. Humanity paid with oceans of blood, with entire fleets annihilated, with Earth itself scarred beyond recognition. But they did not stop. The Council had demanded tribute. Humanity gave them fire. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the impossible unfolded. The Council, unchallenged for millennia, was reeling. Its fleets fractured, its grip weakened. Worlds long enslaved rose in rebellion. Species thought broken forever took up arms, emboldened by the humans who refused to kneel. The tide was turning, not because humanity could conquer the Council alone, but because they had proven it could be done at all. Their defiance had become a beacon, a spark igniting revolution across the stars. In the aftermath, Earth was in ruins. Entire continents bore scars of bombardment. Billions were gone, their names etched in silence. Yet humanity remained. Bloodied, battered, scarred, but unbroken. They had not submitted. They had not vanished. They had stood against the greatest power in the galaxy and survived. More than that, they had changed the galaxy forever. The Council, once untouchable, was fractured, its aura of inevitability shattered, its reign of fear undone by a single species that had chosen death over chains. No longer did its voice echo with absolute authority. No longer did tribute flow without question. Everywhere, its enemies rose, and its empire began to crumble.